count. Don't forget, you can also listen to the show on IdahoSports.com or wherever you download and subscribe to your podcast. My name is Lucas Gephardt. That is Ryan Luke. Ryan, we got NFL starting here tonight, going on right now. Looking at it right now, Chiefs leading 10-7. Boy, Xavier Worthy is faster than I thought he was. Did you see that opening touchdown? Holy cow!
Lightning bolt, man, lightning bolt.
All right, but we got a lot to talk about here today at the next level for Idaho, and in particular, big focus on the college game. Big stories here coming into week 2 of the college football season. Idaho showing out in Eugene. The big question this week in Idaho, can Boise State do it this week in Eugene? Boise State going to Oregon this week. Obviously, Idaho went to Oregon last week, hung with the Ducks, hung with them late. Didn't really ever feel like there was, and I never really felt that Oregon was going to lose that game. But that being said, Idaho hung with them. They were down by 3 and down by 3 late, and they hung with them and were in that game a lot later than anyone expected.
And the talking heads, the pundits across the country keep saying, this is no slight to Idaho. In fact, they give them their credit. They say FCS, soon-to-be powerhouse, Idaho, hung with Oregon, but then Oregon drops in the polls and the AP polls, and everybody's saying, oh, shoot, maybe this Oregon team isn't as good as we thought. Now, the question, I think, the reality, like you said, I didn't think they were going to lose the game. Dylan Gabriel threw for 380 yards. I mean, they moved the ball almost at will. They just couldn't punch it in the end zone, and that's obviously something they're going to have to resolve before the end of the season, really kind of figuring out how to score in the red zone and not just hit those big home run plays all the time. But that being said, I don't think this was a question of if Oregon's good enough. I think the question is how good is Idaho? And I think that's a critical question. Of course, we're going to, talk up Idaho here, but just from the looks of it, from a surface value, and this is not a true Vandal fan again, but this is just looking at it. This is looking at a really, really good football team.
Yeah, Idaho is going to be really good this year. Now, that being said, came out on Monday that they lost their quarterback for, and I quoting Coach Eck here, an indefinite amount of time. We don't know how long he's going to be out. It's a collarbone issue, so he's not going to be back next week. He's going to be out for a while. So how does Idaho now turn the page? They go to Wyoming here this week. We're going to dive into that as we go along here over the next half hour or so. But to me, Idaho was the story of the week. There were a lot of big stories, and I thought the 4 teams across Idaho all played really well. Ashton Jeanty, we'll get to him in a second, making a very early case to win a Heisman Trophy, over 200 plus on the ground, 6 touchdowns for Jeanty in their game against Georgia Southern.
Yeah, 6 touchdowns, and every time he got the ball, in fact, I was just pulling up the stats, and let's just take a look at them again.
Yeah.
And so Ashton Jeanty, 20 carries, 267 yards along, 6 touchdowns, and the long of 77. So if you do the math, he averaged over 10 yards a carry. He touched the ball, and it was an automatic 10 yards is what you were looking at. And to your point, he makes a strong case to get in that Heisman talk. The reality is the way that college football has shifted, you will never see anybody from a non-power conference win the Heisman. They'll give him his accolades. They'll invite him to New York. I mean, let's say he finishes with 2,000 yards rushing this year, which, by the way, is very feasible. Early prediction: Ashton Jeanty is going to go over 2K in rushing. So that's my thought on this.
Great start on it right now. So.
It totally is.
Yeah.
But and this is what I ask a lot of people, and this was the comment that I said in talking to a lot was, hey, offense is there. It's great. I mean, Madsen looks like the real deal. You and I talked a little while ago, a couple of shows ago, about, hey, if he struggles, they have a guy on the bench who just transferred, 5-star recruit. But it looks like Madsen is pulling his weight and then some. And, how good was that Georgia Southern defense? Probably not that good. But how good was that Boise State defense? Probably not that good. They've got to figure some stuff out in week 2, specifically against a high-flying Oregon Duck team. And I really expect a lot of just soft zone, keep everything in front of them. And you'll just have to see kind of a 4-man rush, I think, is all you're going to get out of the defense.
Yeah, to me, the Boise State game, it was just such a weird game to watch because they kind of ran out to that lead, and then they kind of let Georgia Southern back in the game, and it was just kind of a weird game. So I don't feel like I have a real good feel for Boise State. I mean, obviously the running game is there. There's question marks on the defense for them. I was sold on Maddox Matson. I think they're going to be fine offensively. The question is the defense. And here's the thing with the way that Oregon had played last week. I mean, you said they moved the ball but could never really punch it in. Oregon probably feels like they left something on the table last week against Idaho. And you could just kind of see it when Oregon went for that fourth down late in the third quarter. That was Dan Lanning going, "Okay, enough of this," and I stopped them, right? And so they were able to stay in the game there. But you could clearly see the frustration from Oregon's side. Obviously letting a Big Sky team stay in the game as late as they did. I think Oregon's going to come out with some vengeance this week, and I think Oregon is going to show why they were a top 5 team in the preseason this week.
Yeah, Boise State, unfortunately, is going to get the brunt end of that. That's okay. I think the kind of the trip up, if you will, in week 1 for Boise State, I think, and then having Oregon the second game and having Oregon come out with a vengeance, I think doesn't play very well, doesn't bode well for them trying to get in to the college football playoff, because that is the ultimate goal, winning the Mountain West. I honestly think it's a foregone conclusion. I think UNLV will be good. That could be the trip up game, but honestly, I just see Boise State running through that. The question is how well do they do and how much do they beat these teams moving forward, because they're predicted to win the rest of their games. They're going to be at least 3 to 5 to double digit favorites for the rest of the way through this season.
Yep. Yeah. And this is going to be the only game that they're not favored to win all year, because they were favored against Georgia Southern, and the rest of the way they're going to be favored. So on paper, this should be the only game that Boise State loses all season. As we talked about in previous shows, which you can go check out, I think they're going to lose another one down the road. They have a couple tough road games, but we'll see how it goes. But the running backs for Boise State, obviously, we talked about Jeanty, a couple runs over 70 yards, up towards 270 yards on the ground, 6 touchdowns. Sire Gaines, true freshman, 12 carries, 116, and a touchdown as well. He's a true freshman. I think he's 17 or 18. I think he's 17.
Oh,
so
wow.
He is a young guy. But, I mean, this is just what Boise State does, churning out running backs one after the other.
Madison, right? Alexander Madison, yeah. NFL running back. Jeanty is going to be, in fact, just read a latest early draft. They were doing some early draft and the 2020, I guess it would be 25 NFL draft, and Jeanty slotted in at number 32. I want to say number 31 or 32. They had him going. They say he's first round material as is right now. They said he probably would have been a day 2 pick if he would have come out last year, but he came back because NIL money's good, baby. And that stuff pays really well. And, we can say all we want about the NIL, and I think it pros and cons of the NIL, but it does keep good players in programs for longer.
Yep. Moving on, Idaho State, they played another Oregon school. They played Oregon State last week. You can go check out our interview we did last week with their play-by-play guy, and he said all 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, or D, that he said all 4 quarterbacks were going to play. All 4 did play. I've never seen anything like that. We'll go through the stat line here real quick. Kobe Tracy, 9 of 14 for 114 yards. He threw for 1 of 2 touchdowns. Hunter Hayes threw for the other touchdown. He had 9 yards. Jackson Starman had 35 yards, 4 of 10 passing. And Jordan Cook, 9 of 20 passing for 71 yards. He did throw an interception. Cook and Tracy were both sacked. But, I mean, those are pretty even stat lines when you go up and down it. Idaho State did lead in that game at the end of the first quarter. They got a safety. I thought they played pretty well in Corvallis, but, that is a Pac-2, Pac-12, whatever you want to call it, team. Idaho State will have a bounce-back game this week when they play Western Oregon.
Yeah, Western Oregon should come out with a win for that one, but I'm analyzing this 4 quarterback situation, and I'm trying to put my hat on as a head coach and say, what am I trying to get out of this? And maybe he didn't see enough from fall camp. Maybe, and quite frankly, this is even going to this is going to stir the pot even more. This is going to make it even more convoluted with all the quarterbacks coming out and kind of playing relatively well. They all had their pros and their cons, or all their strengths. They only threw for 229 yards. But that said, it's almost like he wanted to use this game as a litmus test for the rest of the way.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if he gives them one more game where they all get a shot, and then he's got to start narrowing it down just because you want some continuity in your offense, and each quarterback's going to be a little bit different. But I will hand it, hats off to Idaho State. They are dramatically improved from 2 years ago, where they won one game, and they're hanging with an FCS team or FBS team. And, albeit kind of a weakened team at this point, but I think that they did hang really, really well.
Yeah. So Idaho State, they played another Oregon school, Western Oregon, here this weekend. And then how about College of Idaho? Absolutely rolling are the Yotes. 2-0. They've outscored their opponents 110-7. But they'll get their first test this week when they play Montana Western.
Yeah, Montana Western, really tough school, and they're in that top 25 of the NAIA. That said, I do have to say, College of, well, you know what? Let's hold it. We'll do it for another show. How does that sound? But College of Idaho is rolling, and they're playing great football. But Montana Western, that is the one where I say maybe they do have a trip-up game. Maybe not. But moral of the story is they're playing even better now. Andy Peters, the quarterback, is starting to figure it out. He's only 50% completion percentage, I think around 50 that first game. This last game, I want to say he was up in the 60%, and just getting better week in, week out.
Yep. So we'll transition here back into U of I, because like we said, they were the story of the week. They have another tough game. They go to Wyoming here now with a backup quarterback leading the charge. Defense, I thought, as advertised. So we'll go ahead and welcome in today's guest. It is Dane Stewart. Ryan, this is your invite. I'll let you take the lead on Dane here.
That's right, Dane. So Dane and I, history. This is Dane Stewart, ladies and gentlemen. Dane and I broadcasted quite a bit back in Utah. Dane is currently in Utah, but if you can't see from the bookshelf behind him, Dane is an Idaho man through and through. He was raised here in Boise, went to Centennial High School, and just due to the work and the career path has ended up in Utah, but a huge Idaho fan. And if I ever need to get the 411 on the Vandals, I go to Dane Stewart. Dane, welcome to the show tonight.
Hey, thank you, Ryan. I would just add, even if you don't need to get the 411, you still get it from me, because I bleed black and gold. And it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on, Dane. I know it was a little bit of short notice, but you're the man.
Dane, I got to tell you, I was just up in Moscow. I'm an Idaho State grad. I went to college in Pocatello. I went up to Moscow we came back down. My wife and I had a road trip over Labor Day. We went up to Banff, drove back through Moscow, stayed the night in Moscow. We had one drink at the Corner Club. I was like, we got to go.
Yeah.
Corner Club's the spot at Moscow, and great college bar. Loved it. And we were there on a Tuesday and half full. So
it's the place to be, man. I mean, you can't go to Moscow without swinging by the Corner Club. It is legendary.
Yeah. Yeah. Lived up to the hype.
Well, it just goes to show a bunch of lushes up in Moscow. So, no big deal.
Yeah.
Well, Dane, let's get going. Let's talk Idaho football. So, very competitive game. We talked a little earlier about a very competitive game with Oregon. And Dylan Gabriel did throw for 380 yards, but they stayed in the game. Lucas made a great comment. He said he never felt like Oregon was going to lose the game. What was your take on that Oregon-Idaho game?
Yeah, I've watched a lot of Idaho football. My opinion, that was one of actually the best defensive games I've ever seen Idaho play. When you think about what Oregon is as a program and what they've been, in recent years, but even under Coach Lanning, they've always been able to run the football. And I thought Idaho's defensive line was unbelievably successful. I was shocked at how well they played. The largest play in the game came from Idaho. Who would have thought walking into that game that the biggest play would have been from the Idaho Vandals? And I think it speaks to how good their defense was. I don't know that I felt like I didn't think Idaho had a shot, but when it was 17-14, I was like, okay, if we can get a stop here. And really that it was the 4th and 7 that became a 4th and 2. That's when it was like, all right, we're not going to do this. But I felt like if they had a stop and held Oregon to a field goal, I really felt like the offense moved the ball on that drive to get that second touchdown. I was actually curious to see if it was a 6-point game, if they could put together a drive. But I never felt like it was a legit possibility until it was 17-14. It was like, maybe they could do this. Just fell short, but I'll tell you, walking out of there 24-14, it feels like a win for this fan.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, if anything, you delayed those barbecues in Eugene, and if there's anything in Idaho, that's a win, right? So
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, how do you guys move forward now? I mean, Jack Lane's quarterback, who looks like he's going to be the guy not just this year, but maybe a couple years down the road.
Yeah.
Out with a collarbone now. So I know this looks like it's a defensive-led team, but how do you see the offense moving forward with this?
It'll be interesting. I'm excited to see how Wagner plays this week. His limited snaps against Oregon, so I'm not going to read too much into that. Lane, he didn't have a ton of snaps last year either. I think he played one game because McCoy was hurt and then came in relief in a second one, if I recall. I could be wrong on that, but this was really kind of his first time really in a pressure situation, I felt like, and I thought he played okay, right? Given he's going up against the number 3 team in the country, I thought he played well. I'm interested to see Wagner. I know the coaching staff continues to talk very positively about him, a highly recruited kid, but when you put it on a Saturday, it's a little bit different. So I'm interested to see. I thought Wyoming, against Arizona State last weekend, they did not look real strong. I don't think that means Idaho's a favorite at all, but I think it could be a situation where he could walk in and see if he can have some success against a Wyoming team that will probably get stronger as the year goes on. But in a week 2, maybe you can go and chalk some people on the road. It kind of feels a little bit like last year, right? They played really strong against Cal early on, and they went to Nevada, got the win. Could be a very similar structure this year. That Wyoming team, I think, is not insurmountable, but things would have to certainly bounce the right way for Wagner and the Idaho offense.
Yeah, and I'm going to be bluntly honest on this. Wyoming looked terrible. They just looked
terrible. They didn't look good.
They didn't have anything going for them.
No.
So, but the critical point here is you have to go to Laramie. You're playing at 7,200 feet of elevation. I think Moscow sits at 1,000 feet, maybe something like that. 800 feet of elevation. It's huge and it's real. So, Idaho has to go in early, acclimate. You have to, the altitude is a big deal. Now, the question to me is what team shows up? Is it the Oregon team that you've been planning for? Because you have all off season to plan and strategize versus Oregon, and now coming into another, week 2 versus Wyoming, what team shows up? Is it going to be a very run heavy offense? Are they going to try and look to throw the ball, or what do they do? And to be honest with you, I don't know. I don't know what they've seen in Wyoming and their ability, because I know Arizona State was able to throw the ball against them and run the ball very effectively.
Yeah, I'm kind of expecting a very I can't think of the word, but a very basic offense, right? When you think about what they ran against Oregon, they really didn't show a lot, very basic. And I think it wouldn't shock me if they did that same thing, given that it's going to be Wagner's first start, right? Try to establish the run. I actually thought Cummings looked really good running the football. They ran him on a couple of screens where he had some great success. Everything they tried in terms of down the field was really trying to attack the sidelines. They really didn't throw into a lot of coverage. It was really trying to take very deliberate chances, right? Yeah. And I think you could see that same thing at this week against Wyoming. I mean, Arizona State, that's not a really experienced offense either. They welcomed in a lot of transfer portal guys, and they've had their fall camps and all that. But this is not a power offense in the Big 12, and it moved the ball at will against Wyoming. Again, I don't think that means Idaho will, but I think that Wyoming defense, they've got to make some big strides, and that's where I think Idaho, they can still be conservative, but that defense, I think it really relies on the defense, right? If you can hold Wyoming under 21 points, then I think you got a ball game there. But if it gets to 28 or 30, it could be tough for Idaho to score that many with a second-string quarterback in his first start.
Yeah, I just looked up the line of this game. It's Wyoming by 26. Now, remember the score last week, Oregon was total point-wise right at that line. So, I mean, that I feel like is the key, not just for this game, but maybe even moving forward down in the season. When you play, Montana State, when you play, these other UC Davis, when you play these other Big Sky powers, you feel like they kind of got to keep games like in the 20s. Like, can Idaho win a shootout, I guess?
I think they can. I mean, they put up 14 points on Oregon. Now, one of those is a trick play. The other one did come off of a good drive where they had a couple big plays that helped, put them in territory. I do think that, in the early part of the year, as Wagner is getting up to speed, I think it is going to be a little bit lower scoring. But I think if Lane is in there, their ability to run the football and look, they've got some options. They've got some guys that I think on the outside can stretch defenses in the Big Sky, right? Yeah. And I think it's hard in an early game to really measure that when you play, number 3 ranked team in the country. So I don't feel like the offense is going to be an issue this year. I think you have to measure it up against the competition it went up against. I think once you get to conference play, I don't think you have to worry about, we got to be in the 20s. I think this offense can be in the 30s, 40s on a regular basis in conference. But we're a couple of weeks away from that, and the reality is, just like we may learn this week, you're one play away from being down a key guy, and how much depth do you have? And I think that's one thing with all the transfers that left last year. A lot of the depth they were building on the offensive side, well, now that depth is starting, and what depth do you have behind that? And I think that's part of what we'll learn this week at Wyoming.
So I was just looking at the Wyoming line, and they had 118 total yards versus Arizona State. They rushed for 40 yards. Granted, some of those were off of sacks, so you have to take 30 yards away from that. So they would have had 73 net positive yards, or 40 net yards and 73 total yards. They threw for 78 yards. I'm telling you, this is a very winnable game for Idaho. Mm-hmm. I expect them to go in there, and I expect them to impose their will. Because here's what I've noticed more recently, specifically in the FCS, but in the Big Sky Conference. The ones can play with anybody. It's when you get to the 2s and the 3s, yep. Right? And that's the problem. You're playing a 2 quarterback at this point. But if you can pat him and surround him with some good players and call a conservative offense and put him in the right position, I just don't see Wyoming being able to move the ball very effectively. Wyoming couldn't do it versus Arizona State. Oregon really didn't do a super effective job running the ball versus Idaho. I expect Idaho to get a win this week.
It wouldn't shock me, and I'm trying to take off the fan hat, right? But when you look at it, that Arizona State team created a lot of problems in the backfield of Wyoming, and Idaho just did that against Oregon. And when you listen to Coach Eck, he said, "Look, we rotated 10, 11 guys up front defensively," and I think that could be something that could certainly play into Idaho having success against Wyoming if they can. Again, really slow down the running game. If they can get pressure, that Wyoming quarterback did not look very comfortable at all against Oregon State. And you only have so much time, or against Arizona State, you only have so much time week to week. And look, Idaho's got to worry about that on the offensive end too right now, right? They got to get Wagner accustomed and up to speed. But I do think with their offensive line, I think they returned 4 of their 5 starters from last year. Idaho does offensively. You've got a running game with Cummings that I thought he looked really explosive against Oregon, and you have big plays. But I'm thinking about that screenplay that sets up that second touchdown. That guy runs for 40 yards after making that catch, and they exposed the screen a couple times. So I think between the screen game and between the running attack with an experienced offensive line, if you can really control time of possession, you can keep Wyoming's offense off the field. And if your defense can have success with a pass rush and slowing down the run game, you got yourself a ball game. And I'll tell you this, I don't know if Idaho wins. I'll take that line. 26. Sign me up all day. There's no way. No way.
Yeah. I'm with you. I'm hammering Idaho on that line, just purely from the point that I just made of I don't think Wyoming will score 26 points in the game.
No.
Just so there you go.
Of it.
Right. So I'm with you. I like that line. Now, Boise State plays Oregon this week. What did you see from Oregon? I don't know if you follow Boise State much at all, but what is your take on that game, seeing Oregon? How do you think they respond this week against another Idaho team here in Boise State?
As an Idaho fan, I remember the days when that was a great rivalry in the state. I know that game isn't played anymore. That's fine. It is what it is. It's a bad week to be Boise State. Because if you think about Oregon, all they've heard all week long is they're overrated. And who's Idaho? They're out of many people's top 10s. I mean, they dropped from 3rd to 7th, I think, in the AP this week. I think Oregon's going to come out upset. Now, and when I look at Boise State, they gave up 49 to Georgia Southern. I think you better be prepared. And I know Boise probably isn't showing a lot in that game. It's a road game. I mean, it's like get a win and get home. I get that. But I think Oregon's going to come in very focused. I'm actually really interested. I covered Maddox Madsen down here in Utah. Love to see him up at Boise State. Hope he has a ton of success. It'll be interesting to see. I think Oregon's going to play a much different game than they played against Idaho. One thing we didn't talk about, Jeff Bassa, who's that linebacker for Oregon, he's also out of the state of Utah as a linebacker. That dude is a real key on their defense. I haven't heard what that injury status is for him, but I felt like that was a big piece that Oregon was missing once he left. If he's back and that defense is shored up a little bit, I do think Oregon's going to come out and be really, really focused. But that being said, when you look at the history, Oregon is not a team that Boise's had struggles with like other programs. Boise's actually played them very tightly over the last 20 years. Now, I know they're different coaching staffs and there's different rosters and all that, but Boise's never been intimidated by Oregon. That's always been a tough game for the Ducks. So it'll be interesting. I do think Oregon's going to come and really put it together this week, though.
Yep, and I'm with you. I know it doesn't make for a great show art, I guess, when we agree on everything, but I think Oregon covers, and I think Idaho covers this week. Dan here chiming in. He says Oregon by 1 million as well. So, I don't know about 1 million, but
and we go back to the just breaking it down. So Boise State's never been intimidated by anybody. I mean, they're the first living here. I mean, the school's not intimidated. It just came out with the Forbes ranking of the universities, and Boise State doesn't care where they're ranked, right? They just keep doing what they're doing. And that being said, I think that they're going to be able to be semi-effective on offense, but you're going to have to break serve at some point. I think defensively they have been too exposed. That 56-45 final score showed it, and they couldn't come up with big stops when they needed it. And I think that was critical towards the end of the first half, Boise State. And so Oregon's not going to have the same problem. I mean, they have different athletes than Georgia Southern has. They have a different style. I mean, they have an 18th year quarterback in Dylan Gabriel. Isn't he playing in his 18th year? I think something like that. Maybe just his 8th. Anyway, moral of the story is that it's just a highly experienced team, and unfortunately for Boise State, I think they're going to run into a buzzsaw.
Yep. Yeah, I think so too. And, going back to Idaho here, I was just looking at this article that the spokesman review did, and they said that Lane broke his collarbone on the second to last series. I watched the last 2 quarters of this game. I didn't even see it. And I just randomly saw this headline. I don't know if you did you see the play where it even happened?
The only thing I can think about is there was a play where there was a fumble, and I don't remember if it was a premature snap or something, but Lane was on the ground and someone kind of landed on it. It was a loose ball in the backfield. I don't know if that was it, but I don't recall seeing any major hit. I don't recall seeing anything that was like, oh shoot, that's troublesome.
Right.
And the other thing too is, I mean, I felt like I heard somewhere in the post game that Eckett said that it was more kind of precautionary. It was a 10-point game, but you could tell when he was running into that locker room and the way his arm was like that doesn't look good. And my biggest thing is I get money. Idaho has to play these games, and I love when they have an opportunity to show like they did this last week. You just hope you don't come out with an injury. And for me, it's an injury that I believe has required surgery. If I've tracked that appropriately, who knows how long he'll be out for, and who knows even when he's able to come back, what that strength will be and mobility and all that. So I do think it's unfortunate. I would have loved to have seen a full year with him and see what he could do in this offense. There were a lot of expectations, but I do think there's confidence and excitement in Wagner and seeing what he can do. But I don't remember seeing the play exactly where the injury occurred for Lane.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I've had a broken collarbone. I will attest to this. Here's what it looks like. No surgery, and you can get back 6 to 8 weeks. You can be back, and strength's there, and you can do it as long as you can, the strength, and it feels good. You could play football, and that would mean theoretically you'd be out another 5 to 6 games is what you're looking at because they have a bye week in there. With surgery, you're done for the year. So you have to put a plate in, you have to put some screws in, you have to hold it together, and it just depends on the severity of the break on that. And we don't have that update quite yet, but my money's on he's not coming back for this year, so just get ready to roll with what you have.
But Ryan, I mean, let's be honest. You're not Jack Lane. So, I mean, I'm just calling it like I see it.
Yeah, when you get in your 40s, you never heal, right? But if you're in your
right,
teens,
right. No, I know surgery is going to elongate that, and who know, I haven't heard anything around how long he'll be out. I would love to see him back, but it is one of those where if you're sidelined for 8 weeks, even, what does the arm look like, right? And at that point, is Wagner comfortable enough where you just continue on, you get a medical red shirt, and you go on from there, right? Who knows?
Yeah, we're seeing guys play 6-7 years in college, really, these medical red shirts now. So plus COVID years and all that.
Plus
so.
COVID, yeah. Finally, that's transitioning out. I think this is the last year that they can do it. Well, Dane, thank you for joining us tonight. I appreciate your time, and we're going to move on and cut you loose. You want to stay on the show? Go for it. If you want to take off, that's just fine as well. And we appreciate your input on Idaho Vandals. Again, if I ever need to know anything, man, it's you who I go to.
Hey, guys, thanks for having me on. It's going to be a great year for Idaho. Trying to decide if I'm going to go up to catch a game this year. I think it's a year where you need to do it if you're an Idaho fan. Fun team, exciting team, great start of the year, and excited to see where it goes. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks. This is Dane Stewart, our Idaho expert. So there you go. U of I preview, I guess. I don't know. 1 week in. So going to be interesting to see where they go here. You know, they have, we talked about it, they had this huge great game against Oregon, and then you kind of get knocked back down a little bit with this injury to quarterback. So, but you're thinking they win. So
yeah, but I still feel like they're a plug and play, and I still have Idaho winning this game. And I'm not even an Idaho homer. I did not go to Idaho. I mean, I have like a neighbor. So. I have like 3 houses down. I think they went to Idaho, but outside of that, you know, there's no ties other than I live in the state of Idaho. But I do think that they pulled it off versus Wyoming. Wyoming's just not good this year.
Yeah. All right, quickly, let's get to some predictions for this week. We already kind of talked about these a little bit, but you think Idaho will beat Wyoming? I think Idaho will cover the spread. I do think Wyoming will win another close game. I think it's low scoring. I'm going to go 20-17 Wyoming. What are you thinking this week?
Yeah, I was going to say 24-14 Idaho.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on. Boise State at Oregon this week. Alluded it. I think it's ugly. I'm going to go 56-28.
Yeah, that's probably about what I was going to say. I was going to go 56. I do think I think Boise State, Ashton Jeanty is going to be really good. He's going to have a solid game. He's going to go for 150 and probably a couple touchdowns. So I'm saying 56-35.
Yeah. All right. Idaho State hosting Western Oregon. This is a school that Idaho State plays fairly often. It's kind of their warm-up, tune-up game, if you will. I do think Idaho State will roll in this game. I thought the offense looked pretty good, even though they're playing 4 quarterbacks. I'm going to go 35-10 Idaho State in this one.
Yeah, underrated defense at Idaho State, and Nate Reynolds, my boy, anchor in the middle there at middle linebacker. I think Idaho State puts up probably 35-10. 35-10. How's that?
That's what I said. There you go. All right, last one here. First test of the year for the College of Idaho. They go to Montana Western. That game up in Dillon. We said in the open, College of Idaho, they've outscored opponents 110-7. 2-0 going into this one. But this is their first test actually, it's September 14th. So maybe we'll talk about that one.
Yep, that's a bye. That's
next week.
Let's do that.
So 0-0 this week is a bye.
You're going to get that one. You're going to nail it.
Yeah, right. But yeah, that's good. So they're going to have a week to get ready for that one. But yeah, that's going to be their first test of the week. But CFI's look good so far this year.
Yeah, CFI. So let's talk about a couple of Idaho kids. Colston Loveland caught a touchdown pass in the Michigan victory. Yep. I think he had 87 yards, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and he had like 10 receptions.
Yeah, Michigan, on the other hand, offense kind of sputtered a little bit. That's a Fresno State team that is not necessarily the cream of the crop that they necessarily were the last few years in the Mountain West. Michigan's got some things to figure out at quarterback, but Colston Loveland looking great so far.
Yeah, Michigan, just my 2 bits on Michigan. Problem is they are playing with a coach who's not under contract. I don't know if you saw that, and he's coaching regardless. I think that there's a little, Jim Harbaugh does a great job. He builds winners wherever he goes, and I think that he's going to build a winner with the Chargers. But he gets him to a peak, and then when he leaves, it's really tough to pick up the pieces. Look at Stanford, a couple
Yeah.
other places, the 49ers. So I think we're starting to see a little bit of that fallout right now. By the way, Loveland, 8 receptions, 87 yards, 1 touchdown.
Yeah. I heard a take on Michigan that was essentially said that this year's Michigan will be like the 2015 Michigan. So that take has them still winning 8, 9, maybe 10 games this year, but not a national championship contender like they were last year.
Yep.
So, all right. Anything else you want to touch on, or
Let's
should we go watch
see.
some football?
What are the rest of the Idaho kids? Let's go. We have a list
there you
here. Kenyon Sadiq, I didn't have him for any stats in that Oregon game. Who else do we have?
We have Gerard Memoir starting guard for Washington. Washington played Weber State last week, kind of cruised in that one as expected.
Yeah.
But Washington again, another one of those schools that's probably going to take a little bit of a step back this year after coming off that national championship run last year. They just lost their coach plus. So I think they were slated to win maybe 6, maybe 7 games this year, according to the odds makers. So about where I expect Washington to be. And first year in the Big Ten, so obviously their schedule got a lot tougher too.
Yeah, the top 5 of the Big Ten is absolutely brutal. And read an article that said, "What if Iowa was just average on offense? They would be an absolute powerhouse." And so
yeah,
we're starting
right.
to see that move and happen. And then you have, a couple other teams that are starting to play a little bit better football. And so Washington has its work cut out for it. But Gerard getting in there and starting representing Idaho. In fact, there's a highlight. I cannot show it. I wish I could. And it shows him walking in behind. He plowed. In fact, the touchdown was run right behind him. So there you go.
Boom. There you go. I love it. That's the Idaho way right there.
That's right.
Yeah. So who's Michigan got this week? We can look that up real quick. Who's Michigan and Washington got?
So Washington has Eastern Michigan.
Oh.
Yeah. So they should
Michigan
roll.
has Texas this week.
Yep, right there.
So
that's going to be a tough one. Look, Quinn Ewers, I really like Quinn. I followed him in high school, and if he doesn't pan out, there's Arch Manning behind him. But I think Quinn's solid. He's a first-round draft pick. I think Texas is going to be really good this year, and they're going to compete in that SEC. In fact, they're going to push Georgia for that SEC championship. Theoretically, on paper, that's who they should watch out for. So it's going to be a tough game for Michigan. But look, I don't really have any ties to Michigan other than Loveland, and I just want to see him ball out, and that's what he does. And so he has an opportunity to represent one of the best teams in the country.
Yeah, and Michigan is. I just think it's cool to see a guy like him on the national stage. I mean, this is the game of the week going into this week of college football. So, I mean, this is the game that everyone's going to be watching. It looks like Texas is a 7-point favorite going in. People think it should be close. I think Texas will cover in that game, even on the road. That's just how good I think Texas is, and nothing to take away from Michigan. I just think they've taken a little bit of a step back from that national championship contender. I think that's a line you would have seen like last year. So, but who knows? It's in Michigan. It's at Ann Arbor. We'll see how Texas travels.
Agreed. Nothing. And then we said Washington has Eastern Michigan. So should be able to roll on that game. I have no predictions other than Washington wins and they'll be able to run the ball. How's that?
Boom. There you go. So, all right. Well, that'll about do it here for this week. Don't forget to, if you're watching this on Facebook or X, don't be afraid to like and share this podcast. It helps us get to more viewers, grow the podcast, and get this out to more people. We really feel like we're kind of hitting a niche that is kind of underserved here in Idaho by talking U of I, talking ISU, talking these kids that have these Idaho ties. Obviously, we are going to talk about BSU just because they're the king of the mountain kind of here in Idaho. So we're going to talk about all of it. So help us get to more people by subscribing, by liking it, by sharing it, by leaving a comment. when we do these live shows, we are able to share your comments live on the show, and we can talk about them on the show. So feel free to do that as we go along. Ryan and I will be back next week. It seems like we kind of landed on Thursdays to do these things. So, there you go.
Feels about right.
Yeah. So we'll see you next Thursday. For now, enjoy the NFL opener. Just hit the half. Chiefs up 3, 13-10. Enjoy the games this weekend, and we'll see you next week.